It's the late 1940s. Everyone's just getting over World War II, and your first thought is, you know what? I think it's time we built a space station. So, the idea of the International Space Station dates all the way back to the 1940s, which is crazy. I would not have thought that the 1940s would have been the foundational decade for anything to do with space, but it obviously was. I mean, you had rockets and missiles that were being tested. Germany was developing things that were scaring most of the world, but in the end it did help progress space technology. I guess when they realized they could break the Earth's atmosphere and put people in space, they were like, well, we need to start thinking about making a station for them to go to. But no strong design concepts came until the 1950s, when a guy by the name of von Braun decided he was gonna fix that. He came up with the circular space station, which has become iconic in 2001: A Space Odyssey. You saw it in Interstellar. Basically, anyone who's really interested in scientific space films, you're gonna see a circular station at some point. The reason it's circular is it develops what's called centrifugal force, and it creates enough momentum that you can stand on the exterior wall. So the same concept is developing there. But that station was a lot bigger than anything that could be done at the time, and realistically would have taken a lot more time than most people were ready to do. By the 1960s, the US space program and the Soviet space program were in such competition with one another that both of them were just not even bothered with the space station. They were like, we gotta get someone into space, and we gotta get someone to the moon. This trumps everything. So they put all of their effort into making sure that they could get a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Then here's where the lies come in. I was always told that the ISS, or the International Space Station, was basically the first real space station, because America was super involved with it, and so Russia was super involved with it too, but I was not told the whole scope of things. So first, the very first space station was a Soviet space station called Salyut 1. Small, compact, and it was Soviet. Americans didn't like this, so they didn't publicize it too much, I guess. I don't know, which is why I've never heard of it. Then a couple years later, 1973, the US launches their first space station called Skylab. Again, compact. It's basically just like 2 rooms, and that's it. In comparison to the International Space Station, both of these were tiny, but people would stay up there for months at a time in these little tiny things. Soviet space stations, they went through a series of them over the next decade or so, and they were improving every single time. But eventually, Russia made their way to creating the first large, modular space station called Mir. Mir only ended up being about a quarter of the size of the International Space Station. But again, this thing was pretty big. It was the size of a house or so. This idea that the Soviets obviously got to space first makes complete sense why the US doesn't really promote this part of space history. But they're the ones who basically innovated all of this stuff. And so it doesn't feel fair at all to cut them out of the historical record. Mir was launched in 1986. The Soviet Union fell around that time and became the Russian Federation as it is today. And that's when they started becoming a bit more cooperative with one another. So they designed the International Space Station, a much larger modular space station. However, yet again, Russia's launching the first piece. So in 1998, Russia launches Zarya, or Zarya, however you pronounce it. And that becomes the building block for the rest of the space station. I think it's later that year, the US also launches what becomes the central module called Unity. And initially, it was just those two. So astronauts, and as Russians call them, cosmonauts, which sounds way cooler, by the way. From other countries as well, people would go up and they'd study in those 2 modules. And over time, more modules were built. So the European Space Program added 2 more modules over time, one called Harmony, another called Columbus. Japan added a module called Kibo, and there are a couple other modules here and there. this whole thing is truly an international space station. I think what ends up happening a lot of times is that in American political speech about the space station, we always kind of talk about it like it's our own space station. It's ours. And we just happen to let everyone else use it, and that's why it's international. But realistically, it was built by multiple countries across the world, expanding and developing on this thing. Currently, there are also a couple of others up there. There's a Chinese space station, and there's a couple smaller ones. Some of them are not really in use anymore. But now I wanted to get to some of the fun facts about the International Space Station. So, fact number uno. It costs $3 to $4 billion just from the US to maintain the parts of the International Space Station that they are responsible for. $3 to $4 billion a year. That's insane. Another thing is that the astronauts' urine samples are treated like national treasures here on Earth. Yeah! Because they're technically precious resources that can't be recreated, and so all the science is done with the urine. And it's crazy. There's bunkers protecting urine from space. I think one of the most interesting fun facts about the International Space Station and NASA in general came last year, which is that they're opening up the possibility for there to be commercial flights to the International Space Station. So companies like SpaceX, Orbital Sciences, and this they've just announced, I guess recently, that another company called Sierra Nevada make regular deliveries to the space station. They go to the space station a lot to bring up new equipment and stuff. So NASA actually offered a bid. The whole organization of the International Space Station offered a bid to say, we would like to allow one company to build a module for the space station for commercial guests. And so a company called Axiom Space has now developed a new module, and it's going to be attached to the space station sometime soon. And you, too, can go visit the space station for a mere cheap price of $52 million. That's right. Save up, young buck. It's no time like the present to go to space for $52 million. They estimate that the only people who are going to be going initially are people who work for space companies, and then obviously billionaires will go. And now, all of the space organizations, all the space programs are working towards developing the next space station. There have been talks about creating that circular shape again, designed by Van Braun. Anyway, that is the International Space Station. Only a couple lies this time. It's not like my school and education really messed it up for me. They just basically undermined the value and credit that Russian scientists have given us in developing all of this. But despite that, the International Space Station is a cool place. And now, obviously right now it costs $52 million to go, but who knows? Within my lifetime, it could come down to something within the $1,000 just to go to the space station. So stay smoking, everybody. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you later.